Welcome to DrugTalk, the remedy that brings you closer to the science of drugs and the stories that hold their secrets.
Hey, welcome back. We're diving into something pretty wild today. Psychedelic psychiatry. We've got a whole stack of research here all about psychedelics and how they could be used to treat mental health conditions. Honestly, some of this stuff is blowing my mind already.
It's really interesting to see how this research is actually connecting back to ancient traditions, too. It's not just a modern thing.
That's so true. You mentioned ayahuasca in your notes, and it's a perfect example. People have been using that in spiritual ceremonies for centuries, and now science is starting to catch up and figure out why it works.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Okay, so let's break this down a bit. We're talking about LSD, psilocybin, the stuff in magic mushrooms, and how they can actually help with things like depression and anxiety. It seems kind of crazy. Where do we even begin?
Well, for a long time, people thought these substances basically caused psychosis because they could really make people trip out. It wasn't until the 1950s that scientists started to connect substances like LSD with serotonin in the brain, which of course is hugely important for mood.
Right, serotonin. Okay, and that's where this 5-HT2A receptor comes in, right? You marked that as super important in the research you sent. What's the deal with this receptor? Why is it so crucial for all of this?
So the 5-HT2A receptor, think of it like a doorway on your brain cells. And psychedelics, they seem to have the key to unlock that door. And it's not just anywhere in the brain. It's in areas that control how you see the world, how you think, your emotions, all that good stuff.
So someone takes LSD or psilocybin, it binds to this receptor, and boom, it's like flipping a switch in these parts of the brain. What happens then?
It's more like turning a dial than flipping a switch, really. It's not that simple. That 5-HT2A receptor, it's just one part of a really complex network in your brain. Psychedelics, they can really shake things up in those networks, and that leads to the big changes in perception and, like your whole sense of reality that they're known for.
Okay, so it's complicated, but we're figuring it out. One of the things that just blew me away was this idea of synaptic plasticity. It's like, from what I understand, psilocybin can actually change the physical structure of the brain. Like, it's rewiring things. It's not just masking symptoms like a lot of antidepressants. It's
like hitting a reset button.
Yes, exactly.
Imagine your brain is this huge forest.
Yeah.
Right. And there are these paths that everyone follows. Those are your habits, your thought patterns. Well, psilocybin is like a huge rainstorm comes through and creates new pathways, new ways for things to flow. It shakes up the whole landscape.
Wow, that's such a great analogy. So we're talking about actually changing the physical structure of the brain. That's wild. And this rewiring, it's not random, right? From what you were saying, it seems like it's actually pushing the brain toward being more integrated.
Exactly.
You highlighted a lot of research on that.
One of the most exciting things they're finding is that psilocybin seems to increase something called global brain network integration. It's a mouthful. But imagine your brain is an orchestra.
Right.
Each section plays its own part, but it's how well they connect and play together that really makes the music work.
Yeah. Okay. I get it. Yeah.
So depression then could be like some sections of the orchestra are kind of stuck, not really communicating with the rest.
And psilocybin is like the conductor who comes in and gets everyone back on the same page.
Exactly. Psilocybin seems to enhance communication between different parts of the brain. And that shift toward greater integration, that might be a big part of why it shows so much promise for treating things like depression and anxiety, where people get locked in these rigid thought patterns.
Okay, so we're seeing how these substances, especially psilocybin, can rewire the brain, literally rewire it. But how does that actually translate into, real world applications? You sent me some really interesting studies about psilocybin therapy, particularly with patients facing, serious illnesses.
Yes.
Let's jump into that now. One that really caught my eye was that study, the one where they compared psilocybin therapy to escitalopram, which is a pretty common antidepressant.
Yeah.
And they were working with cancer patients, which just adds this whole other layer of emotional weight to everything.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's just one study, right? We always have to keep that in mind. But The findings were really interesting.
It was incredible. They gave some patients a single dose of psilocybin, and it seemed to just blow escitalopram out of the water.
It really did. It was pretty remarkable to see how quickly the psilocybin, combined with therapy, of course, led to these significant reductions in both depression and anxiety for these patients. And what's even more amazing, those positive effects, they were still present months later. Even after just 1 or 2 doses. It wasn't like a temporary high. It was like something shifted.
Right. Like so different from how antidepressants usually work. People are on those for weeks, months even, before they see any changes, and then they have to stay on them.
Exactly. It makes you wonder what's actually going on at a deeper level.
Yeah. And there was that other point you highlighted from that study. It wasn't just that the psilocybin group felt less bad. They actually reported feeling better, more content with their situations compared to people taking acetylibram.
Right. It's like the psilocybin wasn't just masking their symptoms. It was helping them come to terms with their situations, find some peace in the midst of everything.
It's like, wow, here they are facing some of the toughest stuff life can throw at you. And this experience helps them find some acceptance, some meaning. That's powerful stuff.
It really is.
But it's more than just like a feeling, right? We're actually seeing changes in how their brains are functioning, too.
Oh, absolutely. They're doing brain imaging studies, and they found that psilocybin can actually reduce activity in the amygdala, which is like the fear and anxiety center of the brain.
Right. So it's like it's calming down that fear response, letting people relax a little more, not be so on edge all the time.
Exactly. And they're finding that it affects the default mode network as well, which is that part of your brain that's active when you're kind of lost in thought, ruminating, maybe stuck in those negative thought loops.
Oh, that's fascinating. So it's like it's quieting down that inner critic, that voice that's always telling us we're not good enough.
That seems to be part of it, yeah.
It's like all the things that people with depression and anxiety struggle with, the fear, the negative self-talk, it's like psilocybin is calming all of that down.
This all sounds almost too good to be true, to be honest. I mean, there have to be some downsides, right? Some challenges. I mean, it's like psychedelics, they have a bit of a reputation, right? We have to be careful with this stuff. Oh, absolutely. We can't just forget about everything we learned from the 60s when all this research first started. People got a little carried away, not enough caution, not enough thought about the ethics of it all.
Right. It sounds like things got a little out of control. But the research you sent, it seems like things are different now. Like there's a real focus on doing this responsibly good research, making sure the right people are getting the therapy, training therapists properly.
Yeah, it's a whole different world now. The research is much more rigorous. There are ethical guidelines in place, and we're starting to really understand these substances and how they work. We're not just throwing darts in the dark anymore. You know what I mean?
That makes sense. That makes sense. You talked about the importance of the therapeutic container earlier. What does that actually look like in practice? I mean, if someone is going to go through a psychedelic experience, how do we make sure it's safe and supportive?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And there's not going to be one answer that works for everyone, but there's some really important things to consider. First of all, you need a therapist, a guide, who really knows what they're doing, someone who understands how intense these experiences can be.
Someone who can help if things start to go south.
Well, yeah, that too.
Yeah.
But it's more than that. It's about being there to help the person process everything they're going through. These experiences, they can be life-changing.
Mm-hmm.
They can bring up all sorts of stuff, insights, realizations, things that might be hard to make sense of on your own.
Right, right. So the therapist is like a guide, helping them integrate everything they're experiencing into their lives.
Exactly. It's like, that analogy we were using earlier about the brain being a forest? The therapist is like a guide in that forest, helping the person navigate all the new pathways, all the new growth.
I like that. It's like they might not tell you which path to take, but they help you read the map,
I like that, exactly. And it's not just about individual healing either. Some people believe that psychedelics could actually help us understand consciousness in a whole new way, like collective consciousness even.
Okay, hold on. Now you're really getting out there. What do you mean by that?
Well, how some people say that psychedelics can make you feel like the lines between you and everything else just dissolve, like you feel this sense of oneness with everything around you.
Right. I've heard people describe that.
Yeah, so some people think that experience, that feeling of interconnectedness, it could actually have implications for like how we treat each other, how we treat the planet. That's what I mean by collective consciousness.
Wow. So we could be talking about like changing not just individuals, but our whole society.
Hey, who knows?
Who knows?
Right. It's definitely something to think about. That's what I love about all of this. We're just starting to explore what's possible. It's like we've stumbled onto this whole new frontier, and we're just beginning to understand what psychedelics can teach us about the brain, consciousness, what it means to be human. It's a really exciting time to be looking into this stuff.
It really is. Well, this has been incredible. Thank you so much for, diving into all of this with me. This is definitely something I'm going to be thinking about for a long time. And for everyone listening, keep an open mind, keep learning, because it seems like we're just scratching the surface of what's possible. Who knows what amazing discoveries are waiting for us out there. That's it for us today. Thanks for listening.
This was Drug Talk, the remedy that brings you closer to the science of drugs and the stories that hold their secrets. Produced and edited by Dr. Nicholas Dietis.